we are going to be learning what the different parts of an expression are and understanding that variables can take on many different values while a constant is unchanging. Constant means the same, right? Never changes. Variable, varying, it changes from one thing to another. All right, so let's just kind of walk through this. Again, we're just learning vocabulary today. A symbol or letter used to represent an unknown number is called a variable. Okay, some examples of that could be X or Y or Z. A lot of different things that we have that could be variables in an algebraic expression. Okay, but it's a symbol or letter used to represent an unknown number. It's called a variable. Here's an example, and you don't really need to write this example probably, but in this expression, 4 plus x, x is the variable. What is 4 in that expression, just based on what we've talked about already in our lesson objectives? 4 is what? Does 4 ever take on any other value? No. Can 4 decide, I want to be 5 today? It can't, right? So 4 is a constant. Yes, 4 is a constant. And the value that doesn't change in an expression is called a constant. Okay. Now, constants can take on different roles depending on what they are. In this case, the constant is an addend. It's part of a sum, right? But that constant could be a factor, part of a product. It can be a coefficient. It can be take on lots of different roles. It can be a part of a quotient. It can be part of a product. So the constants can take on different roles, right? So on this first test, there's going to be questions that just ask you to identify the variable in an expression. Don't miss that. Identify the constant. Make sure you understand that and it's clear. This is easy. In this expression right here, 4 is the constant. So is everybody good with that? Constant doesn't change. 4 is the constant and x is the variable. All right? Now, so let's look at an example here, some sample questions. What's the constant in this expression?
6.
6? Negative 3 is also a constant, right? Doesn't change. Why is it a negative 3? Yeah, because you guys are good. I can tell you had good instruction last year. The sign in front of the number is the sign of the number, right? So negative 3 is also a constant. What's the variable in that expression? X. Very good. What about that? What are the constants? 71 and 28, and what are the variables? W, Z, and Y are the variables. Right? So that's how you would answer that question. So let's look a little deeper. This expression, 4xy, could also be written as 4 times x times y. That's correct. What is 4 times x times y called? What is a multiplication statement called? Crickets. When you multiply two things together, what is it called? The answer is called a what? A product, right? So this is a product of how many things? 3 things. 1 constant and 2 variables, right? In this case, whenever a constant is being multiplied, these things are all called factors, right? 2 or more quantities multiplied are called factors. Huge word. Huge word. We'll spend a whole lot of our time this year learning how to factor expressions because that's a skill that's very necessary for solving higher degree equations. So 2 or more quantities being multiplied are called factors. The numeric factor of a product, including a variable, is called the coefficient. So the constant in a product expression that involves variable, the constant is called the coefficient. Okay, so you need to remember that. We're just learning language so we can communicate, right? I'm going to tell you how to add 2 things together. You add their coefficients if they're like terms. So we need to know what a coefficient is. We need to know what like terms are. We need to know what all these things mean and how they work together. Okay? All right? Is everybody cool with those 2 definitions? Factors are things that are being multiplied. That's a noun. factoring, or we are going to factor things. Factor is a verb also. Learning to factor is a very important skill. Okay. Now, here's a few examples. We're going to not even do all of these, but which of these, what are the factors in this expression? 7, V, and W. What are the variables? What's the coefficient? 7 is also called a constant because its value never changes, right? Okay. What about this one? What are the factors? -5, R, S, and T, right? Is 5 a factor of this expression? Is 5 a factor of this expression, Jeffrey, you think? What do y'all think? Isn't 5 right there? Isn't -5 -1 times 5? Okay, so we could break -5 down into -5 times 1 or -1 times 5. So I'll ask it again. Is 5 a factor of this expression? Yes. You don't have to list it as a factor of this expression, but if we were going to be very, very, very specific, we would say that the factorization here is -1, 5, R, S, and T. It's important. That negative factor is important. Okay? So just kind of keep that in mind when you look at a negative number. It's okay to say that the factors are -5, R, S, and T, but if we're being really specific, it's -1, 5, R, S, and T. What are the variables in this expression? Constant? Coefficient? Is also -5. Right. What about this one? This was tricky. Now this says identify the factors. Okay? That expression is what? It's division, right? But isn't division related to multiplication? It's the opposite of multiplication. Okay, this is something's not cooperating here. Okay, this is y divided by 3. And they're asking us to identify the factors. We can do that. What are the factors? Y and 3. No. Y and 3 as factors would be 3 times y.
It's y and 1.
Y and -3.
It's y and 1. Or y and 3.
Let me help you out. Right, that's 1/3. Right, you see the 1? Y divided by 3 is equal to 1/3 times y. So what are the two factors of this expression? 1/3 and y. Okay? Division by 3 is the same as multiplication by the reciprocal of 3. What's the reciprocal of 3? 1/3. Right? So y divided by 3 is the same as y times 1/3. So the two factors here are 1/3 and y. Okay? If you write anything down, that one might be the one to write down. But that's an important one. You'll see that on a test or quiz, I guarantee it. All right? All right, here's a new concept, somewhat. Parts of an expression that are separated by a plus or minus sign are called the terms of an expression. Okay, that's important because there's things that we're allowed to do to terms, and there's things that we're not allowed to do to terms. Okay, so the three questions of algebra here that I'm going to reference over and over and over and over is: what am I looking at? What are the properties of it? What am I allowed to do to it? What are we allowed to do to a term in algebra? Now let me give you a specific example of a term. You ready for this term? Here's a term. 6. What am I allowed to do to 6 without changing it? What can I do to 6 without changing it?
3 times 2. Break it, you could factor it.
You could factor it as 3 times 2. I can multiply it times 1. Any form of 1, right? 5 over 5, 6 over 6, 7 over 7. We do that a lot when we're getting a common denominator for fractions. When we get a common denominator, we're multiplying by 1. So I'm allowed to multiply by 1 anytime I want to multiply by 1. Because it doesn't change the identity of the number. Called the multiplicative property, multiplicative identity property. I can multiply by 1 anytime I want to multiply by 1. Okay, I can do what?
Minus 0.
I can add or subtract 0. Now there's actually times in calculus where you'll have to add and subtract 0 to change the form of things. Okay? But not 0 as 0. Okay, so you would want to add x minus x. Okay? I know that doesn't make any sense to you now, but it will one day. But what are we allowed to do to things? We're allowed to multiply by 1 or add 0. Okay? Now, here's the kicker of this. Things like y plus 2 are considered single terms and can include a plus or minus signs, and so can other types of grouping symbols. Okay, so anything that's wrapped up in a grouping symbol is considered a single term. Okay, so this term right here, just like any other single term, y plus 2 can be, we can multiply it by 1 or we can add 0 to it. It's the only thing we're allowed to do to that without changing it. Y plus 2 is a single term. What are some other types of grouping symbols in math? What are we using here as a grouping symbol in y plus 2? We're using parentheses. What are some other grouping symbols? Braces. Brackets.
Could exponents be one?
Exponents, if they're attached to some other type of grouping symbol like parentheses, they can be included with grouping symbols. The ones that kind of people forget about are radicals. That's a grouping symbol. And fraction bars. That's a grouping symbol, right? So an expression that looks like this, how many terms are there? One term. That's one term. Right? The grouping symbol is one thing. This is just like a parentheses, right? X plus 3 over 5 is just like a parentheses. Okay, those things are exactly the same. That's one single term. All right, so just we're learning how to communicate here. The terms of an expression are numbered from the beginning, from left to right, beginning with the first term. You don't need to write that down. Left to right, beginning with the first term. So, identify the terms in each expression. How many terms are we looking at here? 3 terms, right? What's the second term? 57W. The third term? 24x over 5y. Okay, so all we're doing is getting definitions here, so I can put an expression like this up there and say, what do you notice about the third term? All right? So everybody can, oh, that's this. So we're just getting definition. The third term is right here. What do we notice about the third term? It's negative. That's an observation. It's a fraction, right? It's a grouping symbol. There's a grouping symbol there that creates, there's 2 things, but the grouping symbol makes it one thing. Okay? There's 2 products here. These 2 are products. This one is the third one is what's division called? Quotient, right? 2 products and a quotient. What are the coefficients of this expression?
Which one?
All of them. What's the coefficient of the first term? 6. What's the coefficient of the second term?
57.
What's the coefficient of the third term? Negative 24 over 5. Negative 24 fifths is the coefficient, right? Okay, so those are just some deals there. How many terms here? 4 terms, right? Why is that third term a single term?
Because it's a fraction bar.
Fraction bar groups it together as one term, right? So we could talk about the first term, second term, third term. Third term is the complicated looking one. The third term is right here. And it's a single term because of the grouping symbol. All right? All right, I think we're good there. Your homework is lesson 2, practice problems 1 through 30. Now, I noticed that some of you, as I walked around last night, you had the parts A through whatever. Those aren't assigned unless I specify that they're assigned. Yes?
Do you have any like squares?
I tell you what, when you leave here today, I'll upload the squares to PowerSchool. I'll put them on the weekly syllabus page, so it'll be right there with this week's syllabus, and you can print those out. Okay? Any other questions? All right, you guys, it's close enough to the end of the class, can pack up and get ready. And this homework will be due tomorrow.